Hi everyone! Thank you for joining me for the second video reading I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. In the first video, which is linked in the details section below, we read the reviews, the foreword, the preface, and part of the introduction. And with the exception of the introduction, it seems that the book was actually geared to Christians, and not even the, to use the terminology, lukewarm Christians or backsliding Christians, but strong Christians who have faith in God and want to evangelize to atheists. So it was a bit confusing because the title of the book seems to be directed towards atheists, the introduction seems to be directed towards atheists, but the rest of it just seems to be directed towards Christians, leaving us to wonder, who is this book really for? Just like with the first video, nothing interesting is going to show up on screen, so you can just turn this on and have it in the background. That's how I like to listen to a lot of YouTube videos myself. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started by continuing the introduction. So we have here a title or a header of What Kind of God? Before we go any further, let's make sure we're clear on terminology. Most of the world's major religions fall into one of these three religious worldviews: theism, pantheism, and atheism. A theist is someone who believes in a personal God who created the universe but is not part of the universe. This would be roughly equivalent to a painter and a painting. God is like a painter, and his creation is like a painting. God made the painting, and his attributes are expressed in it, but God is not the painting. Major theistic religions are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. By contrast, a pantheist is someone who believes in an impersonal God that literally is the universe. So rather than making the painting, pantheists believe God is the painting. In fact, pantheists believe that God is everything that exists. God is the grass. God is the sky. God is the tree. God is this book. God is you. God is me, etc. Major pantheistic religions are of the Eastern variety, such as Hinduism, some forms of Buddhism, and many forms of the, quote, New Age. An atheist, of course, is someone who does not believe in any type of God. To follow our analogy, atheists believe that what looks like a painting has always existed and no one painted it. Religious humanists will fall into this category. Now, I want to say right here, I'm not going to argue any of this. We're going to just go ahead and go with whatever this definition is, because we're not trying to argue whether this is the definition that atheists use or this is the definition that theists use. We're just going to go along with whatever is defined in the book. So when we're looking at this, a theist has a personal God who's not part of the universe. Pantheist, everything is God. And atheist, there's a painting but no painter. So I'm not sure how well that analogy is going to hold up for the rest of the book, but we'll check it out. So here's an easy way to remember all these three religious worldviews. Theism, God made all. Pantheism, God is all. Atheism, no God at all. In figure, I don't know why they did this before. They put figure I.1, and now they're doing figure I.2. I guess I because of introduction. Theism is depicted as the hand holding up the world, pantheism as the hand in the world, and theism as nothing but the world. And so it says the three major religious worldviews, and we get this figure. One other term that we will use frequently is agnostic. That's someone who is unsure about the question of God. So now that we've defined our terms, let's get back to the issue of faith and religion. Faith and religion. Despite its apparent pervasiveness, the claim that religion is simply a matter of faith is nothing more than a modern myth. It's just not true. While religion certainly requires faith, religion is not only about faith. Facts are also central to all religions because all religious worldviews, including atheism, make truth claims, and many of those truth claims can be evaluated through scientific and historical investigation. Now, I will say I didn't really catch this when we were defining our terms, but I did, this did kind of pop up just now. We defined what types of theism there are, but Frank and Norman never expressed what is religion. So it is kind of interesting to say that religious worldviews include atheism, then what is religion? So what are we talking about? And if would it just be like a combination of facts and faith? So I'm not sure. Maybe we'll find out in the next couple pages. For example, theists such as Christians, Muslims, and Jews say that the universe had a beginning, while many atheists and pantheists like New Agers and Hindus say that it did not, or the universe is eternal. Okay, I guess we're saying many atheists, so, I don't know, I think most atheists, at least that I've met, and this is a bit, I know we're kind of picking on this already, but I don't know any atheist who says that the universe is eternal. Especially if we're looking at atheists as this kind of overly skeptical, college-educated, went away from their religion because of evolution being taught in university, that kind of person. That type of person is also going to accept that the universe had a beginning. They're not going to call it that God created it. They're going to say that there was a rapid expansion of the universe, that we're not really sure where the universe fits into what might be a multiverse. There might be something else. There might be nothing else. We don't really know what's outside of the universe, or if the universe is all that exists in existence, right? So, we're not really sure where it is, but I don't think any atheist would say the universe is eternal, at least not when this was written back in 2004. Maybe if it was 1904, sure, but 2004, no. So that is a bit strange. These are mutually exclusive claims. They can't both be right. Either the universe had a beginning, or it did not. By investigating the nature and history of the universe, we can reasonably conclude that one view is right and the other is wrong. The alleged resurrection of Christ presents another example. Christians claim that Jesus rose from the dead, while Muslims say that Jesus never even died. Again, which of these views is right and the other is wrong? Again, one of these views is right and the other is wrong. How can we know which one is right? By evaluating each of these conflicting truth claims against historical evidence. Notice that not only do religions attempt to answer these questions, but scientists also have something to say about these matters. That is, science and religion often address the same questions. Where did the universe come from? Where did life come from? Are miracles possible? And so on. In other words, science and religion are not mutually exclusive categories, as some have suggested. And I agree, I may have mentioned in the previous video that I teach my students that religion was our first attempt at science, because we're really trying to do the same thing. Number one, understand what's going on in our world, and number two, trying to figure out if we can make any impact or control the future. So in a world that is unpredictable, are there things that we can do so we can reliably predict the future in a way that we can control? So for example, if I am touching dirty things such as corpses or feces, and I have open cuts on my hands, or I get my hands, I touch my mouth with my hands, or some of the dirty matter touches my mouth, am I going to get sick? If so, are there ways to prevent me getting sick if I'm having to handle these items? So in this way, we're trying to figure out how to predict the future in a way that's positive, where I have better health. In one way, we might anoint something with religious oils, or we might wash our hands or avoid touching these things directly, such as wearing latex gloves. So these are some things that we talk about in class. Certainly, not all religious claims are open to scientific or historic investigation. Some are unverifiable dogma. Nevertheless, the validity of many religious beliefs can be checked out. Some beliefs are reasonable, they can be proven with a high degree of certainty, while others are clearly unreasonable. Well, this is going to be pretty difficult, because the Christians believe that you cannot test the Lord thy God. So to suggest that this is open to scientific inquiry, that is to test it, it does seem a bit odd that we're making these kinds of claims right off the bat. The problems with Christianity. Is Christianity reasonable? We believe it is. However, unless one makes a thorough investigation of the evidence with an open mind, belief in Christianity may appear to be problematic. First, there are many perceived intellectual objections, like those mentioned above, the problem of evil, and the objections of many scientists. Second, there are emotional obstacles that sometimes obstruct the acceptance of Christianity. Christian exclusivism, the doctrine of hell, and the hypocrisy of Christians are emotional roadblocks to just about everyone. I don't know. I'm not going to say the hypocrisy of Christians is an emotional roadblock to myself as an atheist or any other atheist I know. It's pointed out that Christians may be hypocrites. It's pointed out that a Christian who tries to look down on an atheist or look down on a fellow Christian for not doing a certain thing that they believe is right according to their interpretation of the Bible, that same Christian may be doing something wrong by their own interpretation of the Bible as well. So these hypocritical things are pointed out, but I don't think it's an emotional roadblock. However, the reason that I bring this up is because when I was in the church, again, that's the Pentecostal church, this was brought up constantly, that the reason people are atheists is because we aren't good enough Christians. So not only do we have the burden of being good Christians to get into heaven, but we have the burden of being the best Christians we can on display, because the world is looking to us. And we were told that the world is looking to us to kind of show the way, or to show the love of Christ, or to show God's love through our actions. So it's this idea that it's our fault. We are creating emotional roadblocks, to use this phrasing, or we were just told we are stopping people from coming to Christ because we're being hypocritical, bad Christians. So that's a bit strange to see this pop up again, suggesting that atheists remain atheists because of the emotional roadblock of the hypocrisy of our fellow Christians. So I think that Frank and Norman are kind of setting us up to accept a very specific type of Christianity, probably their type of Christianity. So yeah. In fact, hypocrisy in the church probably repels people more than any other factor. I didn't even read this. Look, wow. Exactly as I said, right? This is what we're oh my goodness. Someone once said the biggest problem with Christianity is Christians. Wow. Okay, so this is nothing has changed, right? But to be fair, I was Christian at the time that this book was authored, but wow. So I guess this is still a thing that people are still pushing, this idea that it's because you, the Christian, aren't being a good enough Christian. You're the reason. So again, this kind of makes you wonder, who is this book for? It would be better, it says someone once said the biggest problem with Christianity is Christians. It would have been better if Frank and Norman interviewed some atheists and asked them to rank their concerns or their roadblocks to accepting Christianity, and just that was included there. I assume this would be ranked at the bottom constantly, that we wouldn't accept the truth of Christianity because some Christians are hypocrites. That's such a bizarre concept, but it's to put all of this stress and to put all of this responsibility onto Christians to be even better Christians, to attend church even more, to cough, cough, buy more of these types of books so they could be even better Christians. For Christians watching this isn't the case. Just because there are Christians who do things that don't match up with Christianity, that has no bearing on my understanding of Christianity or my lack of acceptance of Christianity. It's the same with Islam. If you see Muslims behaving in a way that goes against the Quran, that doesn't stop you from becoming Muslim. That doesn't even factor in to your conversion or reversion, to use their phrasing, to Islam or not. You just don't accept Islam for a bunch of reasons, but none of them are some Muslims don't follow the Quran. That's such a bizarre reason, isn't it? Everyone recognizes that Christianity isn't a monolith, that no group of people is a monolith. Sometimes you're going to have people that behave differently from the prescribed rules and regulations. We had Marines who were lazy, right? You think of Marine, you think of somebody who's always exercising, ready to work out, somebody who is a lean, mean military machine, basically. And we had people who were just laying around, finding excuses to not exercise, coming to work hungover, those kinds of things. So, even in like the Marine Corps, where uniformity is paramount, we still have people who don't follow that uniformity. So this idea that Christians being bad Christians stops me from converting to Christianity, it's bizarre. So I really don't like these phrases. Someone once said, who? Was it an atheist or was it a Christian? Because some pastor making this claim, some televangelist making this claim, they don't speak for atheists. And it's a bit weird for this to be included as if they spoke for atheists. Finally, there are volitional reasons to reject Christianity, namely Christian morality, which seems to restrict our choices in life. Since most of us don't want to answer to anyone, yielding our freedom to an unseen God is something we do not naturally want to do. This is another one of those things that Christians really misunderstand about the atheist perspective. So again, if you're a Christian listening to this, please take note. The idea is not that I don't want to follow Christianity because I don't want to follow Christian morality. It's that first I need to have a reason to follow Christian morality. So this idea that I'm not really answering to anyone, that's also false. I'm answering to other people in my life. I'm also answering to myself in a few years. So if I'm doing things that Christians will talk against, such as overindulgence in alcohol and doing different kinds of other non-alcohol drugs, I'm still going to be responsible to myself, right? In a few years, doing these kinds of harmful things to my body, these are going to cause not only physical harm, but a lot of times the indulgence of these things is due to not wanting to deal with some mental health issues. And those mental health issues are not only not being dealt with, but they tend to stack up with some other issues that you add to it while you're drunk, while you're high. And so at the end of however long you've been doing this, you are now still left kind of at square one, plus a bunch of other stuff that you created while you were an alcoholic or while you were indulging in these other types of drugs. So this idea that I'm not answering to anyone, I'm always going to answer to somebody, even if that person is just me in the future. So that's really a bizarre way to think about it, that if we don't have a God, I don't answer to anyone. I still have to wake up and go to work even if I don't feel like it, because I have to answer to my boss. I have to do a good job teaching because I still have to answer to my students. I have to be kind to my friends and find gentle ways to talk to them if I have a disagreement, because I'm responsible to them and I answer to them. So this idea that we don't answer to anybody, it's really untrue. And when Christians bring this up, it really shows how divorced you are from the average social interaction. And obviously you still have these same social interactions. You are still responsible to yourself in the future. You're still responsible to your boss. You're responsible to your children. You're responsible to your friends. But it's this idea that God's the one I'm really responsible to, and everybody else is just kind of existing as I exist. This really cheapens those interactions between people. And this is when we get people who will shun their children because their children don't follow certain worldviews the same way that these Christians or other types of religion, but this is Christianity in particular, they don't follow the interpretation of the Bible the same way that their Christian parents do, therefore they should be shunned. And this really emphasizes that the Christian parent is only caring about what they think that God thinks of them. And this is sad, to just put it in a single word. It's a sad way to look at your interactions with day-to-day people. Now again, I don't want to restrict my choices in life. I want to eat a bunch of food that I know is going to pack on a bunch of weight, but I still have to restrict my choices in life because I know that if I add a bunch of weight, it's not only unhealthy in general, but I'm going to put myself in a lot of physical pain because I've got a bunch of bad discs in my spine. So just adding this weight is something I don't want to do, so I have to restrict my choices in life. This idea that Christians have is that if you don't follow Christian morality, you just do whatever you want. That's not true. So we're still following a certain type of lifestyle. We're still restricting our choices to achieve a certain goal. So this would just mean that I would follow a different type of morality or a different type of goal setting that would be Christian. So I don't have a problem with answering to other people. I don't have a problem with restricting my choices in life because I already do those things. The problem then is, why should I follow the Christian perception of morality based on their interpretation of the Bible? Why should I follow that? What are some reasons I should believe that these are the ways that I should live my life if I wish to have a good life, or if I wish to have a healthy life, or a well-rounded life, or what have you? So this is the problem with Christian morality, is first we have to agree that Christian morality is necessary. And until we determine that a God exists, that this God has communicated with people, and that those people have accurately documented the God's terms in the Bible, until we first establish this, we can't agree that Christian morality is correct. Even if I acknowledge that there is a God and I just don't want to follow Christian morality for whatever reason, I still would be not an atheist. I would still be theist. I would believe that there's a personal God that exists. I just wouldn't follow this personal God. So this idea that Christian morality stops people from becoming Christian, or stops people from leaving atheism, that's not the case. We can have we can disagree about Christian morality but still agree about God. So this doesn't stop us from being atheist, or stop us from being theist. So it's just a really poorly understood concept, I think, among Christians, and they keep throwing it at theists or atheists as if this is like a gotcha, well, it doesn't matter what I say because you don't want to live your life according to God, etc., etc. Let's first find the agreement that there is a God, and then we can kind of go from there as to what we both can agree on that God said about our lives, and so on. So with that being said, let's actually look at what are the problems with Christianity. So the authors say that the problem is the perceived intellectual objections, like those mentioned above, the problem of evil, and the objection of many scientists. And since that was in the previous video, the problem of evil is basically, if God is good, then how come he doesn't stop evil? If he's all powerful, why isn't he stopping evil? That kind of thing you've probably heard about. And the objections of many scientists, this was really poorly described by the authors. And they were basically saying that evolution gets rid of the need for God, which it doesn't. And this other idea that the only thing that we can accept is something that's testable in the laboratory, and nobody says that. So that's a bit bizarre. So those are the intellectual objections, which I don't know anyone who necessarily won't believe in a God because of that. If God is evil, so what? That still gets me to believing in God, which stops me from being atheist. This may not get me to Christianity, but this at least, I still can recognize a God exists, even if I think that God is evil, because I'm granting there's a God to be evil. So we don't need to get over these intellectual objections to at least get us to God to start with. The emotional obstacles about Christian exclusivism, the doctrine of hell, these are things that, again, okay, so maybe this is the case. So if we can get us to a God, so we're theist or deist, however you want to break that down, but theist according to the definitions that were listed here earlier, then okay, so Christians are exclusive and hell exists. We can argue about why and how hell exists. We can argue about who's going there, but we're still agreeing that a God exists and that hell is a place, right? So we can still get there even without adopting Christianity and remaining atheist. There's that third option where we become deist, right? And this idea about Christians being hypocrites, and that's an emotional roadblock, and that's the biggest problem with Christianity as Christians. That is something I don't think is true for most people, definitely not true for me. So that's not a roadblock that I need to get over. And finally, that idea about Christian morality, which restricts our choices in life. Any way that you follow life will restrict your choices in life. Even if you follow a way to be totally open and totally free to do absolutely anything, You're going to get yourself into an accident. You're going to put yourself in a bad situation. You're going to be in a coma. You're going to be brain damaged, or you're going to die from your bad choices. And that's going to limit the choices that you have in life, right? If I want to do something that's really dangerous to me physically, and I do that thing and I end up with traumatic brain injury, right? A TBI, then I'm going to be restricting my choices in life just because I made a choice that gave me brain damage. So pretty much anything we do can restrict our choices in life. Just existing sometimes restricts our choices in life, depending on where, like which social structure or social level that we're born into. Maybe I would like to take a trip around the world and take a 5 years off of work. Maybe I don't want to work anymore at all. That's not a choice that I'm able to make because I don't have a bunch of money. I'm not swimming in money. I don't have parents who'll just pay for me to do whatever I want. So I think no matter where you land, you can't just do whatever you want forever, right? Or for as long as your life goes. So I think this is, it's not really an argument that can be made for me. I mean, we could agree on God's existence. We can agree on Jesus. We can agree on all these things. And if we get to the point where I agree that God exists, I agree that these are the rules that God put into place, then I'm going to have to agree with Christian morality if I want to go to heaven. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what is heaven? Do I want to go to heaven? What is hell? Do I want to avoid hell? These are questions we can have, but we can still get us to that deist position even without discussing Christian morality. So this isn't a limit on my ability to adopt Christianity. My ability to adopt Christianity, the limitation is just, it's not listed here. It's just, I guess it's an intellectual objection, but it's not what's listed here. I just don't see evidence for any God or gods, pantheist or theist. So we'll see if this is covered. Yet despite these intellectual, emotional, and volitional obstacles, we submit that it's not faith in Christianity that's difficult, but faith in atheism or any other religion. Okay, that is, once one looks at the evidence, we think it will take more faith to be a non-Christian than it does to be a Christian. This may seem like a counterintuitive claim, but it's simply rooted in the fact that every religious worldview requires faith, even the worldview that says there is no God. So again, I'm kind of wondering what they mean by religion, because I was thinking maybe they just mean worldview, but now they're talking religious worldview. Is religion just... It seems like they're talking about religion as anything that has to do with the question of God and how you answer that. So I guess that's the case. I don't know. We'll see. That'll be our temporary definition for right now. So the idea is that it's a counterintuitive claim to say that it takes more faith to be non-Christian than it does to be Christian. And this is a bit interesting, because what's the title of the book? I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. But now we're saying I don't have enough faith to be a non-Christian. So this actually really underscores something that I said in the previous video, where it was talked about that somebody listed former atheist as one of their credentials. And one of the things I mentioned is that they lump us together, us as atheists, they lump us together with people who aren't Christian, or even Christians who just aren't very active in the church or who haven't been to church in a while. They lump us all together. And so it's when somebody who is Christian and they claim to be a former atheist, you really have to ask, what did atheism look like for you? And when they talk about it, it's like I was mad at God, or I didn't see a reason to follow God or observe or worship God. But they admit that they believed in God, which means they're not atheists. So this is kind of that thing that I was actually talking about. So, you know, I'm glad that the book brought this up, because then it shows, you know, exactly what I meant. Why? Because as limited human beings, we do not possess the type of knowledge that will provide us with absolute proof of God's existence or non-existence. Outside of the knowledge of our own existence, I know I exist because I have to exist in order to ponder the question, We deal in the realm of probability. Whatever we've concluded about the existence of God, it's always possible that the opposite conclusion is true. In fact, it is possible that our conclusions in this book are wrong. We don't think that they are because we have good evidence to support them. Indeed, we think our conclusions are true beyond a reasonable doubt. This type of certainty, say 95% certain or higher, is the best that the fallible and finite human beings can attain for most questions, and it is more than sufficient for even the biggest decisions in life. But nevertheless, some faith is required to overcome the possibility that we are wrong. So they're saying here that faith is required to overcome that possibility that they are that 5% or lower that's wrong. But how did you determine you're 95% correct? That you have 95% certainty that your probability, that the probability of your conclusions being true is 95% or higher. How did you determine that? Like, how many universes have you been to that have been created? And how many of them were created by a God? And how many of them were created by a personal God versus an impersonal God? And how many were always in existence, which is the other thing that they claim, right? So where's this 95% plus certainty? They're kind of confusing. I'm convinced. I'm sure. I really strongly believe. They're confusing that with like statistics. How are you statistically 95% or higher statistically coming up with the idea that the Christian God is true and there's a less than 5% chance that the Christian God is wrong? Where is this coming from? What percentage is that? What percentage am I at that I am open to the idea? Am I at 50%? Am I at 5%? Where do I fall in here, right? It's a bizarre thing to say, but it makes it sound really meaningful when we stick a number on it and we can say, well, technically I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. And I guess that itty bitty little portion that I'm wrong, yeah, sure, that's faith. But everything else, I mean, it's like mostly facts. It sounds really good to be able to say that, but where do these numbers come from, right? I mean, so then where do the other religions fall for their percent of certainty? How does one have a percent of certainty? When we look at statistics in other areas, like in testing part of the population, that statistical analysis or statistical significance, that comes from somewhere, right? But for these two guys just to decide, yeah, we're 95% or more sure that we're right. Where does this come from? The statistics only make sense if you have something to compare it against. When you talk about statistical significance in the population, you need the population. So if we are the smaller portion as humans that we're testing statistically against the larger population, the universe or whatever's outside the universe, if anything is outside the universe, if that even is a fair question to ask, how are we testing it against that? So it is a bit, where does this number come from? That's really where I'm left with. Where does it come from? We think our conclusions are true beyond a reasonable doubt. I guess, yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we agree with that. The faith of an atheist. While some faith is required for our conclusions, it's often forgotten that faith is also required to believe any worldview, including atheism and pantheism. We were reminded of this recently when we met an atheist named Barry at one of our seminars. Barry was incredulous that a mutual friend, Steve, had become Christian. He said, "I can't figure Steve out. He claims to be intellectual, but he can't answer all the objections I posed to him about Christianity. He says he doesn't have all the answers because he's still new and still learning." Well, yeah, okay, I'm not even going to read this, but that's literally what atheists say. I don't have all the answers, I'm still looking. And Christians criticize that because they say, well, I have all the answers and the answers are God. And if I don't know specifically, I can still trust that it's still God. So I don't know where this is going, but let's see if we can turn it and apply it in the opposite direction. I, Frank, said, Barry, it's virtually impossible to know everything about a particular topic, and it's certainly impossible when that topic is an infinite God. So there has to come a point where you realize you have enough information to come to a conclusion, even if an unanswered question remains. Okay, so again, same issue with atheism. Barry agreed, but still didn't realize that he was doing exactly what he was chiding Steve for doing. Barry had decided his view, atheism, was correct, even though he didn't have exhaustive information to support it. I don't... the problem is that because the authors have set up these inaccurate representations of atheists, I'm left questioning whether this interaction ever happened, and whether this interaction, and even if this interaction happened, does that mean Barry represents the rest of us, right? Barry agreed. Okay, so Barry had his view. Okay, did he know for sure there is no God? Had he investigated every argument and evidence for the existence of God? Did he possess exhaustive information on the question of God? Could he answer every objection to atheism? Of course not. Well, that's not how atheism works. It's remaining neutral until you're presented with enough information. It's not going through all the religions and having to debunk every single claim. It's remaining neutral until such a time that you have been presented with adequate evidence that at least one God exists. It's the same reason you don't believe in a lot of stuff, a lot of claims people make. Indeed, it would be impossible to do so, since Barry, like Steve, is dealing in the realm of probability rather than absolute certainty. He has to have a certain amount of faith to believe that God does not exist. Now, wait a minute, we're changing the definition. The previous definition here is no God at all. Let's see how they defined it. Pantheist. An atheist, of course, is someone who does not believe in any type of God. So to say I don't have a belief in any type of God, I don't have a problem with that as a definition because I don't hold a belief in any type of God, which is not the same as saying I believe there is no God. And so this is, he's changed the definition. And I don't even know if he realized he changed the definition. Do the authors know that this is not the same thing they said? Somebody who doesn't have a belief in a God does not have to believe that no gods could exist or that no gods do exist. So these are two different things. And Barry doesn't seem to have said anything about that. Barry hasn't said, I believe that it's impossible for God to exist. So it's not like there's any reason for the authors to believe that Barry believes this. Although he claimed to be an agnostic, Carl Sagan made the ultimate statement of faith in an atheistic materialism when he said the cosmos is all that is or ever will be. How did he know that for sure? He didn't. How could he? He was a limited human being with limited knowledge. Sagan was operating in the realm of probability just like Christians are when they say that God exists. The question is, who has more evidence for their conclusion? Which conclusion is more reasonable? As we'll see when we look at the evidence, the atheist has to muster a lot more faith than the Christian. You may be thinking, the atheist has to muster a lot more faith than the Christian. What possibly could Geisler and Turek mean by that? No, I don't ask that. I see what they're saying because they're misrepresenting what the rest of us believe. Yeah. We mean that the less evidence you have for your position, the more faith you need to believe it and vice versa. Faith covers a gap in knowledge. Okay, great. And it turns out that atheists have bigger gaps in knowledge because they have far less evidence for their beliefs than Christians have for their... Again, this isn't a belief in no gods. And statistically, how? How are we saying this? How many times are we comparing God universes versus no God universes? And it turns out, let's see, that they have bigger gaps. In other words, the empirical, forensic, and philosophical evidence strongly supports conclusions consistent with Christianity and inconsistent with atheism. Here are a few examples of that evidence we'll unpack in the ensuing chapters. Okay, let's do it. Number 1, the scientific evidence overwhelmingly confirms that the universe exploded into being out of nothing. Well, didn't they just say that atheists believe in science and also atheists believe that the universe has always existed? But now they're saying that the science says that the universe expanded, not from nothing. So, glasses off, bridge of nose rubbed. This is the problem. And so Christians, and I doubt that Turek and Geisler will ever see this, but anybody who's interested in going into Christian apologetics, you have to be sure that you are nailing what the opposite party believes. You have to be sure of it. Because to misrepresent this, you're putting into question everything else you're going to say. Nobody believes that the universe, quote unquote, exploded into being out of nothing. Nobody believes this. And if they are, I've never met them. Few and far between. This is not what the science says. This is a singularity is not nothing. Exploded is the wrong term to use for it. Big Bang is it's like a colloquial way to refer to the rapid expansion, but not an explosion, because those are two totally different things. So this is a misrepresentation of what is believed. And they could just look it up. They could have just looked into a textbook. It's 2004 when they wrote this. The internet existed. They could have looked this up online. So for them to put this in the absolute wrong way, to completely misrepresent what is actually believed or what is actually concluded or what is actually found to be the case, for them to completely misrepresent that, it has to either be ignorance, where they really didn't know and they didn't bother to look it up to check, and they just thought our misunderstanding or our current interpretation of it is totally correct. It's so correct we don't even have to verify it. Let's just write it down. So either they're really misinformed but genuinely ignorant, or they knew better and they wrote it this way anyway. So they're either being ignorant and confident in their ignorance, so confident that they believe this is what atheists believe, and if we say this, then they're going to resonate, or it's going to resonate with them, and it's going to reach them and reach them for Jesus, etc. So they're genuinely, confidently ignorant, or they are deliberately misrepresenting it for, I don't know why. I don't know why they would do that. But again, when you do this, this calls into question the rest of this. The idea that they're presenting is that they have all this evidence for their beliefs to the point that they're over 95% confident that their evidence is so correct and it points to Christianity as the most reasonable belief, the most reasonable conclusion. And then they start off with something that is demonstrably false. I mean, literally, that's one of the things when I was teaching geography, we had to stop and talk about like the start of the universe and how the earth was made. It's just a brief chapter. And that's one of the things I had to explain to the students, is that the Big Bang is a misnomer. It's not like a bang. It's not an explosion. It's, just a rapid expansion of the universe out of a singularity. If you want to know more, ask your science teacher. That's what it was. So I mean, even high school students are not this they don't have this kind of misunderstanding. Wow. Either someone created something out of nothing, the Christian view, or no one created something out of nothing, the atheistic view. Which is more reasonable? The Christian view, which requires more faith, the atheistic view. Well, yeah, if you deliberately misrepresent it and you write the questions in such a way that you have a who for creating, as opposed to anything else, which requires more faith, the atheistic view, sure, yeah, I'll go with that in this paragraph that totally misrepresents everything and shows that you don't care about getting anything accurate. You don't care about actually communicating to atheists, and you just want to make Christians feel better about themselves. Sure, yeah. In this misrepresentation, then the Christian view makes more sense when you say who. However, someone created something out of nothing is not the Christian view. This is the deistic view. So we don't get to Christianity just because if I misunderstand everything as an atheist and I don't even know what the science says and I go with this and I say, wow, gosh, the authors have a good point. I guess somebody must have created something, right? If I say somebody, that doesn't get us to Yahweh. That doesn't get us to Jesus, because some Christians believe that Jesus was the one who did the creating. That doesn't get us there. That gets us to a creator. This could be, I mean, for again, to not, try to misrepresent or misconstrue or take us off on a tangent or anything. For all we know, we could be some kind of really advanced computer program, and our quote unquote creator is just a person like us, except in the real world. Like we have like the Sims or something, and they have their own little lives moving around, and maybe in their own minds, and if you can use the term like that, they think that they are all that there is. So we might be just really advanced simulation software. We don't know. But if we are, then the creator is not like this infallible, perfect, all-knowing, all-loving, heaven and hell creating kind of dude. It's just a person. And this person may have died already. And so this is why I don't like this idea that, I think it's the ontological argument, where we go back to like the first cause. Why does the first cause have to be a perfect, eternal, etc., God? Why can't it be a imperfect God? Why can't it be a mortal God? And then why are we creating something out of nothing? That's a weird one. Either someone created something out of nothing, or no one created something out of nothing. Maybe no one created something out of nothing because there's not nothing. And this idea, no one created. So a non-person or a non-entity created. It's built into this, that it's not reasonable. So this is what I really don't like when Christians try to argue, well, there's no way to prove it with hard science, but I can prove it philosophically. You can argue pretty much anything into existence if you do it this way. And that's the problem with this. This is not getting us any closer to the truth of what the situation actually is, the reality of the situation. All this is doing is getting us to look at the author's tricky writing. That's what we're at. We're at tricky writing. And I don't appreciate that. It's not only really, really dishonest, but it also makes me wonder, is this the type of non-believers that Frank and Norman were? Because they claimed that they were convinced along the way that Christianity is right. If this was convincing to them, it's not convincing to me, because I know that nobody makes these claims, and this is a foolish way to present a very serious argument. A very serious discussion is being presented in a silly, silly way. If this is the limit of their intellectual understanding, is to have something that's genuinely wrong, then is that all it took for them to become Christians? It reminds me of this discussion that Ali Dawah had, and it's in a video I did about Islam, and I watched this video with Ali Dawah, and it just reminds me of this thing that he mentioned where God has to be real, because if you leave I forget if it was a desert or if it was a table or like a glass or something, if you leave that alone, a dessert will not magically form, therefore God exists. And it's like, is this really your intellectual capacity? Is this how you understand the argument, and therefore this is a satisfying answer for you? Because if so, we are not starting off on the same point. So with this idea, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, sure, if you misrepresent what atheists believe and you reword it in a very silly manner, sure, you don't have enough faith to be an atheist. But if you're talking to actual atheists and hearing that all we have is, we're not really sure, what do you have? What can you show us? It's a really neutral point to begin from. I mean, it doesn't require any faith to say, I'm not sure. Can you show me? And whether I agree or disagree, we can go on from there. But that doesn't take any faith. Point 2. The simplest form of life contains the information equivalent of 1,000 encyclopedias. Christians believe only an intelligent being can create a life form containing the equivalent of 1,000 encyclopedias. Atheists believe non-intelligent natural forces can do it. Christians have evidence to support their conclusion. Since atheists don't have any such evidence, their belief requires a lot more faith. Well, what is the evidence, right? So hopefully we'll see where the evidence comes from, but I mean, if we look at something like a mountain, and I'm not talking about DNA, because I think that's what the authors are referring to. But if we look at something like a mountain, these are things that are created with natural forces. And if we were to do something like paint it or describe it, it would seem like it takes a lot of effort for us to even recreate a piece of this. To paint it in a 2D fashion, this would take a lot of effort on my part to process it, get the right paints, to get the mental or the image from that I'm seeing into onto the canvas, right? And so this would take a lot of effort on my part to just recreate even a piece of this thing that I've seen. Therefore, the real thing must be even more complex and has to have been created by an even more complex creator, more than a human, such as a god, right? But in reality, this is something that was created with natural forces. So the idea that this simple life form, the smallest form of it, it contains the information equivalent of 1,000 encyclopedias, I can say that a mountain contains the construction equivalent of 1,000 buildings. That doesn't mean that it was constructed by builders or that a super builder, a creator deity, was the one that had to construct it. If I'm going to say that they're similar, that the information equivalent, right, the construction equivalent, if I'm going to say that they're similar and I'm going to compare them to something that we know is created, of course our only option is to say, well, therefore, the more complex creation must have also been created. But if we look at it and say, well, what is this information, quote unquote? Is there a way this information can be altered or started without somebody needing to go stir the pot or start the recipe, right? Is there a way that this can happen? Then we're looking at it differently. If we're looking at it for what it is, instead of comparing it to what it might be or could be or can be expressed in analogy form as, right? If we look at it for what it actually is, let's see what it says. So if we're wording it in a way that leads us to word it in a, like, to define a god into existence again, that's kind of where we are with point 2. But let's find out what the evidence is. Hundreds of years beforehand, ancient writings foretold the coming of a man who would actually be God. This man-god, it was foretold, will be born in a particular city from a particular bloodline, suffer in a particular way, die at a particular time, and rise from the dead to atone for the sins of the world. Immediately after the predicted time, multiple eyewitnesses proclaimed and later recorded those predicted events had actually occurred. Those eyewitnesses endured persecution and death when they could have saved themselves by denying the events. Thousands of people in Jerusalem were then converted after seeing or hearing these events, and this belief swept quickly across the ancient world. Ancient historians and writers allude to or confirm these events, and archaeology corroborates them. Having seen evidence from creation that God exists, point 1 above, Christians believe that these multiple lines of evidence show beyond a reasonable doubt that God had a hand in these events. Atheists must have a lot more faith to explain away these predictions, the eyewitness testimony, the willingness of the eyewitnesses to suffer and die, the origin of the Christian church, and the corroborating testimony of the other writers, archaeological finds, and other evidence that we'll investigate later. Well, this is assuming that all of those are accurately represented. And there are great videos that other atheists have made about things like the claim that the eyewitnesses could have saved themselves by denying that the events that they proclaimed happened, if they denied those events happened. And it seems that there's actually either nobody or one person, and that the one person, I believe it was Peter, that there was no evidence that he actually could have saved himself if he denied the claims that he was making. And it seemed more like it was a political attack instead of a religious attack. So this is those eyewitnesses endured persecution and death when they could have saved themselves by denying the events. Questionable. The eyewitnesses recorded those predicted events actually occurred. Questionable. There is significant debate in the biblical scholar community, not like between atheists and Christians, but I'm talking people who actually study this for a living. There's significant debate about the idea that these eyewitnesses are the ones that wrote it, that Matthew was penned by Matthew and John was penned by John, that the Gospels are named for people that are associated with Christ, and that is by virtue of a church tradition. Even when I was Christian, I had a hard time reading some of the gospel portions that would say stuff like, this event had occurred and there were no witnesses. So stuff like the angel coming to the tomb of Jesus and removing the guards or making them go to sleep or something like that, and then rolling away the rock, and then Jesus left the tomb, and then it says that these were not witnessed by anyone, or that the apostles or the disciples fell asleep and they were in the garden with Christ, and this was when Jesus showed them how to pray the Lord's Prayer, and all of them fell asleep. And it talks about what Jesus was doing while all the eyewitnesses were sleeping. Well, if they were all sleeping, then who is the one writing this? Because they're sleeping, they wake up when they're confronted by the guards. Jesus is taken away, he's crucified, he's put into a tomb, he comes back, wanders around, shows everybody, hey, I'm actually Christ, and he leaves. When did Jesus have time to tell them about all of this? Did he tell them when he came back? Why would he? Hey guys, remember that time that you guys all fell asleep? These are the things I was thinking and praying about. Why would this even come up? So there was stuff in there that even as a Christian, trying to learn more about God, trying to get deeper into my faith, even as a Christian I had trouble with, because it didn't seem like these were written by eyewitnesses, especially the parts that said nobody was awake or nobody was around to witness this. So that's a really bizarre thing to say, oh, well, these are definitely claimed. Some of the stuff that is this part, hundreds of years beforehand, ancient writings foretold the coming of a man who would actually be God. This is a reference, I believe, to Isaiah, and it was the idea, or writings from Isaiah, and instead this prediction isn't about a man God coming, but something like the nation of Israel, right? This is not about a savior, because if it was, then the Jewish people who have the same text would interpret it the same way. This type of interpretation that the ancient writings are foretelling of a Messiah figure, these are things that Christians believe after the fact, that they are retrofitting to apply as a prophecy for Jesus. But the people who actually follow this stuff, who were there at the time when they were reading this, they never expected that this was supposed to be about a Messiah. So these are things that they're not agreed upon. So to say that this is the case, it is true that this happened, these are not things that people agree upon. So yeah, again, it's one of those things that if I just go ahead and accept what you're writing here, authors, yeah, maybe it seems interesting. But why should I accept what you've written? You've already misrepresented the scientific claim about the expansion of the universe. You did that in point 1. So why should I believe you here? This immediately makes everything that you're going to say that is the case, this makes me want to go look it up, right? And in this case, I already happen to know about this. Also, these predictions about leaders coming or about Messiah type figure, I mean, even Kim Il-sung, so the grandfather of Kim Jong-un, even he had these alleged predictions that he fulfilled. The time that he was born, how he was going to save the North Korean people, or the Korean people, I should say, that he was going to free them from oppression, and in this case, the Japanese oppression, and all of this. This is within our recent lifetime when we can easily find all the documents that are supporting it, not having to piece together things from the ancient past, but this is stuff that occurred like within the past 100 years. So it's a really, it's not a big claim, or it's an unsurprising claim that cult leaders exist and people follow those cults. This is not a big claim. This is not something unique to Christianity. The ideas that these are astronomical events that align, the same was said about Kim Il-sung. So these are not remarkable, they're not unique, and I'm not surprised that Christians today make claims about Jesus in the past. That's just what people do. This isn't remarkable. So I would say that Christians would have to have faith that this particular cult claim is true when all of the other cult claims are not. That would take more faith, as opposed to an atheist saying, well, the other cult claims don't seem to be miraculous or godly or whatever, beautiful, unique, proving that there's life after death, etc., right? None of those cult claims are accurate, so I also don't think this cult claim is accurate either. And we're talking about cults like this small belief. We're talking about it like a small religion or early religion, not necessarily all the negative connotations with cults, because that's what Christianity, of course, started out as. It was an offshoot of Judaism. It was a Jewish cult belief. So I don't think it's unique in any way at all. Christians have this idea that it's really unique. Now perhaps these 3 points have raised in your mind some questions and objections. Girl. They should, because we're leaving out a lot of the detail that we'll unpack throughout the book. I mean, it's not the detail you've left out, it's the inaccuracies you left in. That's my issue. The main point for now is that you see what we mean when we say that every worldview, including atheism, requires some degree of faith. Even skeptics have faith. They have faith that skepticism is true. Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, if we're going to say everything is faith, then nothing is. What do we mean by faith? Likewise, agnostics have faith that agnosticism is true. It's not true. It's neutral in the way that they've defined it, that agnosticism is, I'm not sure whether a God exists. I don't believe that it's true that I'm not sure whether a God exists. I don't have faith in that. That doesn't even make sense. I believe, what? It doesn't even make sense. So even the agnostic definition they gave, this phrasing doesn't even make sense. So what do they mean by faith? There are no neutral positions when it comes to belief. Child, yes, there are. It's like saying there's no neutral positions when it comes to any belief. You don't have to agree to one or the other. I think I heard ages ago what Matt Dillahunty made this argument about, or a similar argument, saying that you could bet on a boxer who is going to win. Just because I don't bet on boxer A doesn't mean I think boxer B is going to win. And just because I don't bet on boxer B winning, that doesn't mean that I believe boxer A will win. I can be neutral and say I'm not sure who's going to win the fight. That's a neutral belief. That's a neutral position. So yeah, if you're going to claim there's no neutral positions and just make that as a factual statement, then yeah, you can talk about how, yeah, you need faith to be an atheist, but you have to support this with facts. Why do you believe that there's no such thing as a neutral position when it comes to beliefs? And then beliefs what? In general? Beliefs about God, beliefs about the Christian God, beliefs about theism, beliefs about pantheism versus theism versus atheism. You know, these words are not really defined. We may disagree on the definition they landed on, but they at least define theist, pantheist, and atheist. They switch their definition throughout this introduction, so we haven't even gotten away from the introduction, and they've already changed their definition. But they didn't define faith, they didn't define religion, they didn't define beliefs. So if they're going to be, these are one of those things you feel like maybe we don't have to define it, but if we're going to refer to this as faith and constantly argue about faith, and we know people have different beliefs or different interpretations about what faith means, probably should have defined faith. And then beliefs. Is that the same as religion? Is that the same as religious worldview? What do you mean by this? So this is a really, I mean, why? Because again, if we're talking about beliefs in general, you don't have to hold a belief. You can just say, I'm not sure, which is what they said about agnostic. As Philip Johnson so aptly put it, one who claims to be a skeptic of one set of beliefs is actually a true believer in another set of beliefs. Well, sure, but why should, so what if Philip Johnson said that? Sure, he said it, so what? Does that mean it's true? Why should we believe him in this case? If atheists are saying, I don't have, the disagreement that we're having here is that the authors are saying, well, Philip Johnson said this thing, and atheists are saying something else, and I'm talking to atheists, so I'm going to believe something that atheists aren't saying. Why would you do that? Why not just talk to atheists and ask what they believe? Why are you saying, well, yeah, you say that you are neutral. However, this guy, he says you're not. So you're not. I mean, this guy isn't even alleging to be God or anything. It's not like what some Christians quote the Bible, that everybody knows in their heart that there is a God. So you atheist, actually, you know in your heart that there's a God. Some Christians do claim that, but in this case, it's just Philip Johnson, not Philip Jesus. So who cares what Philip Johnson says? In other words, atheists who are naturally skeptical of Christianity turn out to be true believers in atheism. As we shall see, if they are honest with the evidence, they need a lot more faith to maintain their atheistic beliefs than Christians need to maintain theirs. Oh, if we're going to talk about honesty with evidence, I mean, I've already said it. Discovering the box top. Now, the box top, if you didn't watch the first video, this is a reference to the idea that there's like a puzzle, and on a box of a puzzle, it shows the image that the puzzle is supposed to create. And so this idea is that religion is that image, but how do we figure out which box top actually belongs to the puzzle of life? We claim that there is strong evidence supporting Christianity. How will we proceed through this evidence? Since about 1996, we have traveled together around the country conducting a seminar called The 12 Points That Show Christianity is True. In it, we proceed logically from the question of truth all the way to the conclusion that the Bible is the Word of God. This book will generally follow the same logical 12-point progression. Number 1, truth about reality is knowable. Number 2, the opposite of true is false. I think when it comes to logic, now I'm not a logician, okay, so if I am wrong about this, please let me know, but isn't the opposite of true not true? It's like there's A and not A. It's not if not A, if it's like, those are the two options, if A or not A, as opposed to if A or B, right? Isn't that how that goes? It's like A or not A. Everything, it's either falls under A or it falls under not A. It doesn't have to fall under B. It's sort of like the idea of guilty versus not guilty, but there's no option of innocence. We're not proving innocence. We're either proving that somebody is guilty, or we're at a point where they say not guilty. We're not saying innocent. We're just saying the facts do not lead to us to believe that this person is guilty. So we can only say not guilty. But that doesn't mean they didn't do it. It doesn't mean they're innocent. So yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Number 3, it is true that a theistic God exists. This is evidenced by the A, beginning of the universe, cosmological argument, B, the design of the universe, teleological and the anthropic principle, C, the design of life, the teleological argument, and D, moral law, the moral argument. Oh goodness. Okay. So we're already saying in this logical progression to prove that God is true, we're already just throwing in, oh, there must be a theistic God automatically, as opposed to a pantheistic God, or a theistic God, or a deistic God, right? Because we're just going to assume all these things are true. And I don't call the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the moral argument, I don't consider those to be evidence of the theistic God. If I did, I wouldn't be atheist. So hopefully when they go through these, they're going to explain how these all prove a God. But again, they're already defining stuff into existence with wordplay. These are not, I don't hold out a lot of hope that we're going to get anything more than fancy wordplay. Not even fancy, just tricky phrasing that leads them to feel like they've provided evidence when they haven't. But I'm open. We'll find out. Point 4, if God exists, then miracles are possible. Why? Why? Why would that be true? Point 5, miracles can be used to confirm a message from God, such as acts of God to confirm a word from God. Why? They don't explain why. Does this follow for anybody else? If I just had too much caffeine and my brain is like just not braining correctly? Point 6, the New Testament is historically reliable. This is evidenced by A, early testimony, B, eyewitness testimony, C, uninvited or authentic testimony, and D, eyewitnesses who were not deceived. So again, we don't know if it's eyewitness testimony. Point C, uninvented, not uninvited, but uninvented. Well, how do we know that it's authentic testimony? How do we know that? How early is early testimony? And then eyewitnesses who were not deceived. They better explain what they mean by this. Point 7, the New Testament says Jesus claimed to be God. Okay, so what? Point 8, Jesus' claim to be God was miraculously confirmed by A, his fulfillment of many prophecies about himself, B, his sinless life and miraculous deeds, C, his prediction and accomplishment of his resurrection. 9, therefore, Jesus is God. 10, whatever Jesus, who is God, teaches is true. 11, Jesus taught that the Bible is the Word of God. The Bible didn't exist when Jesus was alive. How could Jesus teach that the Bible is the Word? Jesus taught he is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus didn't say, this book that don't exist yet, oh, this is the way, the truth, and the life. He said, me, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He didn't say the Bible is something you have to listen to. In fact, when the Pharisees made arguments about the Jewish law and you have to follow this, he's like, I don't have to follow nothing. Why don't you guys use your brains a little bit? So I would say that Jesus taught that he is the Word of God, that we can get rid of. And a lot of Christians even say, well, Jesus brought the new covenant. That was the old covenant. So we just have to really follow what the New Testament says, not the Old Testament. So I would even argue that Jesus taught that he is the Word of God. That's how I would rephrase that. 12, therefore it is true that the Bible is the Word of God, and anything opposed to it is false. Again, this is what I mean by just, you can put anything in a bullet point fashion and then decide that it's true. This is what they're doing. This is not the same as making a logical argument. I mean, I guess for some people we can, you can still have a logical argument that's not sound. Like if the premises are false, it can still follow a logical progression. And again, if I phrase that incorrectly, please correct me in the comments below. But basically, we can have something that follows a logical progression, but it's not actually true. So I can say something like, we can say that a feather can shatter glass. So what happens if I hit glass with a feather? The glass will shatter. So that follows, right? We've defined that the feather is able to shatter the glass. So I'm saying if we hit the glass with the feather, based on point 1, therefore the glass will shatter. But is that something that's actually going to happen? Just because I put it in that format, that doesn't mean that anything I said is actually true. It can logically follow, but it's not actually true. And again, please correct me if I'm using the wrong logic terms here. But basically, we can write up the rules a certain way, but that doesn't mean the rules reflect reality. So if we're going to say, well, this is true because it's historically reliable, maybe the rest of the argument, it's going to be depending on this, and the rest of the argument will now make sense since we said this is true. but that doesn't mean it's actually true when we look at it on its face for what it is. So, and again, how can we say that Jesus taught the Bible is the Word of God? Like, are they, like, that's just bad Christianity. That's just bad theology, right? My goodness. Okay. Before we begin presenting this line of reasoning, please note 5 points. First, we are not suggesting that the above points are true by definition. Most of these points are premises that need to be justified by evidence. Okay, let's get into that, right? For example, point 3 claims it is true that the theistic God exists. This claim isn't true just because we say so. It needs to be backed up by good evidence, by good reasons, and we'll give those good reasons when we get to that point in the book. Great. I mean, I figured, but cool. Second, notice that we are starting at the point of complete skepticism. That is, we are starting with a person who says he doesn't even believe in the truth. We need to start there because if the prevailing view of the culture is right, that there is no truth, then it can't be true that the theistic God exists or that there is a true word from that God. However, if there is truth and that truth can be known, we can go on to investigate the truth of God's existence and the other points that follow, such as miracles are possible, the New Testament is historically reliable, and so forth. This is a reference to what was covered in the first video, where they basically are saying that the cultural view, the prevailing view, is that there's no such thing as objective truth, which that's not what anybody says. There were things that we can recognize as subjective, and there are things we can recognize as objective, and we shouldn't confuse the two. The end. That's all it says. But a lot of Christians, including Norman and Frank apparently, have completely misrepresented this again, either deliberately, so they're liars, or innocently, so they're just that ignorant and misinformed about the topic, but they decided to write a book to address that topic that they know nothing about. So are you a liar, or are you just that ignorant about the thing that you decided to confidently write about? So they're giving us this idea that the average person in the modern culture doesn't believe in truth. So we got to start with this position. The other thing I really don't like about this is that the authors are telling us we're starting with this position with a person who says he doesn't even believe in truth. I thought this was for the atheist, right? But it appears that this is still like instructionals for Christians. That's how this appears. Third, if this line of reasoning is sound, and that's a big if that this book will attempt to show, it necessarily disproves other religions where they differ from the Bible. This sounds incredibly arrogant and presumptuous, but we'll address that later. Don't let that stop you, because it certainly hasn't stopped you previously. This would not mean that all other religions are completely false or that they have no truth. Nearly all religions have some truth. We're simply saying that if the Bible is true, then any specific claim that contradicts the Bible must be false. For example, if the Bible is true and it says there is a God beyond the universe who created and sustains the universe, theism, then any claim that denies theism, for example, atheism, must be false. Likewise, if the Bible is true and it claims that Jesus rose from the dead, then the Quranic denial of that fact must be false. By the way, the reverse would also be true. If evidence showed that the Quran was true, then the Bible would be false wherever it contradicted the Quran. I don't know why they included this. It sounds like they're trying to be gracious and say, oh, we've considered all positions. But I mean, I don't see them arguing. Why would they argue for the Quran? They're not doing that. Fourth, we give the evidence for Christianity because we ought to live our lives based on truth. Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. We believe that the unexamined faith is not worth believing. Furthermore, contrary to popular opinion, Christians are not supposed to just have faith. Christians are commanded to know what they believe and why they believe it. They are commanded to give answers to those who ask, 1 Peter 3:15, and to demolish arguments against the Christian faith, 2 Corinthians 10:4-5. Since God is reasonable, Isaiah 1:18, and wants us to use our reason, Christians don't get brownie points for being stupid. What about brownie points for lying, then? Because if they're going to say this, and they're going to say, well, you know, we did our due diligence, then you're just lying. So either you're really ignorant and decided to write a book about all the things you don't know, or you're lying. And now you're saying you're lying because this implies that you guys aren't quote unquote being stupid. So you're lying then. That's not a good start. In fact, using reason is part of our greatest commandment, which, according to Jesus, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Well, I don't think that I would jump to using reason because it says with all your mind. I would say that your mind has to be in accordance with scriptural thoughts. Things like avoiding sinful thoughts. That's what I would say with all your mind, or that you should be thinking about God and worshiping God, and that's how your heart and soul and your mind can focus on God. I would, that's, I mean, even using my Christian, like putting on my Christian hat, I wouldn't agree that loving God with all my mind means using reason to prove God. It's bizarre. Finally, we are often asked, if Christianity has so much evidence behind it, then why don't more people believe it? Our answer, although we believe the evidence we're about to present shows that the Bible is true beyond reasonable doubt, no amount of evidence can compel anyone to believe it. Belief requires assent not only of the mind, but also of the will. While many non-Christians have honest intellectual questions, we often find that they seem to have more volitional resistance to Christianity. In other words, it's not that they don't have the evidence to believe, it's that they don't want to believe. So, who are these non-Christians that you're talking about? We have found that many more. Who? Who are they? Show like a poll that you conducted. That you could have included that. That could have been, figure I.3. Who are these many more? This is like when Paul said, and Jesus was seen by many, right? I mean, this is... It wasn't Paul that said that, but there's this idea that the many. Who are the many, right? So it's not my fault. I'm believing it's stuff that's super rational, and apparently there's just tons and tons of evidence, which is why I know that Christianity is true 95% or more, even though there's no statistical basis for that number. But it's that everybody else is just sinful. That's all. We all have the same mounds of amazing evidence, but those non-Christians are just choosing to throw it away. I mean, that's what they're saying. That's the part that I really, again, who is this book for? Because this isn't for atheists. You're basically saying you are a dishonest person. And anytime you raise objection to Christianity, you're doing it because you're a liar. They're basically trying to tell atheists what they believe, and the root of the reason for their lack of desire to adopt Christianity. That can't be for atheists. This is a message for Christians. The great atheist Friedrich Nietzsche exemplified this type of person. He wrote, "If one were to prove this God of the Christians to us, we should be even less able to believe in him. And it is our preference that decides against Christianity, not arguments." Obviously, Nietzsche's disbelief was based on his will and not just his intellect. Is this the many more? One guy who wrote stuff, that's the many more? And I'm not even going to take this on its face that they're interpreting this in its context. Right? And I know I've seen other atheists talk about... if we can prove that the God of Christianity is true, we should be less able to believe in him, like to put our trust in him, because the God of the Bible is a monster. So we would recognize he's real, we would stop being atheist, but that doesn't mean we would believe in him, because why would you choose to believe in a monster? But then if you're going to go to hell, well, you do your best to serve him, right? But then heaven is just to be around this monster. Is that what you want? So this would create a whole separate issue to have to contemplate, but you would at least get away from atheism, which I mentioned before. At this point, a skeptic might reverse the argument by claiming it's the Christian who simply wants to believe. See, I didn't even do that, right? That didn't even enter my mind. It was just this idea that it's you're claiming to write this book for atheists and then writing it to Christians to tell them atheists are dishonest. True, many Christians believe only because they want to and cannot justify their belief with evidence. They simply have faith that the Bible is true, and merely wanting something to be true doesn't make it so. However, what we are saying is that many non-Christians do the same thing. They take a blind leap of faith that their non-Christian beliefs are true simply because they want them to be true. In the ensuing chapters, we will take a hard look at the evidence to see who has to take the bigger leap. Again, based off of what metric? The skeptic might then ask, but why would anyone want Christianity to be false? Why would anyone not want the free gift of forgiveness? Which skeptic would ask that? This is a Christian thing. This idea that it's a free gift of forgiveness. We've seen this in the Jack Chick tracts, that this idea that it's free and all this other stuff, that it's easy to take, it's a gift of love, it sounds really good, it's forgiveness. No skeptic would ask this. This is a Christian idea of a skeptic. This is a Christian's belief in, well, God, why wouldn't anybody want to believe in Jesus? All we're doing is offering a free gift of forgiveness. And so they're now creating a fake skeptic who's going to represent all of their thoughts, right? This is a Christian thought. This is not a skeptic's thought. Good question, but we think the answer lies in the volitional factors we touched on earlier. Namely, many believe that accepting the truth of Christianity will require them to change their thinking, friends, priorities, lifestyles, or morals, and they are not quite willing to give up control over their lives in order to make those changes. Again, I already talked about how this is false. We already make those changes. We already conform to society. We already change ourselves to look better at work, to have to not offend people. When we want to say something really directly, we say it in a roundabout way to not offend our friends because we care about our friends. We don't go and indulge in absolutely everything because we can't give up that control because it's going to hurt our bodies in the future. So this idea is a Christian idea. This is a Christian myth that it's either you live for yourself or you live for God. That's a total Christian myth. It's the same kind of idea that if you're not Christian, then what's stopping you from killing everybody? Or if you don't fear hell, then how come you don't go steal? So truly, you must really believe in Christian morals and you must really fear God deep down because you're not doing those things. No, you're telling me that if you didn't have Christianity, you would go do those terrible things? I sure hope not. Perhaps they realize that while Christianity is all about forgiveness, it's also about denying yourself and carrying your cross. That's like a lot of lifestyles anyway. Like I mentioned earlier, just a healthy lifestyle. Somebody who wants to maintain their health, or at least slow down the degradation of their health, they deny themselves and quote unquote carry their cross. They carry this burden with them while other people may be enjoying certain types of food or imbibing in certain types of alcohol and those kinds of things. You deny yourself that and you carry this burden with you. So this would just be changing what we are beholden unto, right? Indeed, Christianity is free, but it can cost you your life. No. Again, so, as they said, indeed, Christianity is free. I already mentioned that free gift. They mentioned that free gift. Jack Chick mentions that free gift. This is a Christian's thought, and it's rewritten. It's like it's stapled on this skeptic's this like label of skeptic, But the skeptic might then ask, no, the skeptic would never ask this. You're asking this, and you want to address a Christian question as if it's a skeptic's question. It's not. There's a difference between proving a proposition and accepting a proposition. We might be able to prove Christianity is true beyond reasonable doubt, but only you can choose to accept it. Please consider this question if you're open to acceptance. Okay, so now you're talking to atheists? Because before you're talking to Christians, so now you're talking to atheists. If someone could provide reasonable answers to the most significant questions and objections you have about Christianity, reasonable to the point that Christianity seems true beyond a reasonable doubt, would you then become a Christian? Well, how do we define a Christian? Think about that now. If your honest answer is no, then your resistance to Christianity is emotional or volitional, not merely intellectual. No amount of evidence will convince you, because evidence is not what's in your way. You are. In the end, only you know if you're truly open to evidence for Christianity. The way that Christianity was always defined to me is somebody who believes in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Somebody who, so the triune God, which was referred to earlier, and that was in the previous video. It's somebody who believes that Jesus is the Son of God, who died and rose again, who was ascended into heaven and reigns at the right hand of the Father. That is a Christian. So if you prove to me that Christianity is true, I would be a Christian by that definition. The end. I would have that belief. Does that mean that I think the God of the Bible is awesome? No. Does that mean that I would be accepting of the atrocities that God allows to happen? No. Because if that God is real and true, then this quote-unquote loving God is allowing terrible, terrible things to happen. It's like saying, if I could prove to you that this horrible tyrant of a dictator is true, would you worship him? And you might say, well, no, I don't want to worship a horrible tyrant. But you might also say, well, if this makes me avoid punishment, then maybe I would serve this terrible tyrant. And that's totally up to you and your, ideas about life and what you think would make more sense. For some people that are, they have a family and they want to make sure their family is safe, it might make some more sense to them to just follow what the tyrant says so they can be with their family and share that love. And for other people, it might be more important that they live sticking to their own beliefs, their own morals, and that they fight against that tyrant because that tyrant is a terrible person. But you wouldn't deny that the tyrant exists and that you live in that tyrant's nation. You wouldn't deny that the tyrant has made certain laws. You just wouldn't worship the tyrant, or you might. And that has to do with, do you believe that you're going to gain something that's more important than what you might lose? But just being a Christian, yeah, I think we'd all be Christian based off of the Christian definition that I had as a Christian, the one that I walked you guys through, the believing in certain things. So I think that they don't even, it's like you don't even know what you're arguing for or against at this point. I think they're so set on trying to make the atheist seem so unwilling and so arbitrarily against Christianity that they're just kind of making up stuff at this point. Because I mean, would you then become a Christian? You would have to. By the definition of Christianity from other Christians, you would have to become a Christian. It doesn't mean you would like that this is true. It just means you wouldn't have a choice but to believe it. That's all. And that's all that Christianity is, accepting that these premises are true, again, according to the Christian definition of Christianity. So, talk about dishonesty. Jeez. One beauty of God's creation is this. How long is this introduction? Good gracious. One beauty of God's creation is this. If you're not willing to accept Christianity, then you're free to reject it. This freedom to make choices, even the freedom to reject truth, is what makes us moral creatures and enables each of us to choose our ultimate destiny. This hits really hard at the heart of why we exist at all, and why God might not be as overt in revealing himself to us as he would like. For if the Bible is true, then God has provided each of us with the opportunity to make an eternal choice, to either accept him or reject him. And in order to ensure that choice is truly free, he puts us in an environment that is filled with evidence of his existence, but without his direct presence. A presence so powerful that it could overwhelm our freedom and thus negate our ability to reject him. I am a teacher, and I still have students who freely choose to not do their homework, knowing that they're going to fail and have to retake my class. Just because I am physically present and proving to them that their choices are going to get them a result that they do not want, that doesn't somehow override their desire and ability to choose not to do their homework, not to study for the exam. So this argument here that if we knew God existed, we can't choose to follow him or not follow him. No, we would just know for a fact he exists. We can still choose to follow or not follow him. That's such a bizarre thing. And as a Christian, I never questioned that. I just accepted that because that's what was told to me. It just makes sense. I accepted that uncritically. But as an atheist, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. We could absolutely know that God exists because he overtly shows himself his direct presence, or shows ourselves his direct presence, but it doesn't overwhelm our freedom and thus negate our ability to reject him. We can still reject him. I mean, how do you reject somebody who pursues you romantically? They don't send you mystical like notes that are written on your way to work in cryptic methods that you have to kind of piece together. No, they can just ask you, hey, do you want to go on a date? And you can still reject them. People do this all the time. So this idea that, well, if we know God exists, we can't reject him. Of course we can still reject him. We just wouldn't be atheists. That's all. We would know he exists, but that doesn't mean we would be Christians. That doesn't mean or that we would follow Christianity. We would be Christians. If all of those things are true, we would have no choice to believe them, right? But it doesn't mean we would follow those gods. It doesn't mean we would worship those gods. In other words, God has provided enough evidence in this life to convince anyone willing to believe, yet he has also left some ambiguity so as not to compel the unwilling. So this is one of those things where you're openly admitting, I'm believing because I choose to believe. And that for other people, I mean, isn't this saying that it's God's fault that I'm an atheist? I mean, why would I? Now, again, it's not about being unwilling. It's just for some people, there's just not enough evidence. Maybe they just misunderstand, just like the authors misunderstood the scientific theory about the expansion of the universe, right? So that doesn't mean they're unwilling to accept science. It just means they misunderstood genuinely. Okay, we're going with that. We're not going with them being liars. We're going with them genuinely misunderstanding. So why can't we genuinely misunderstand? Why can't we just not see eye to eye when you're having this discussion? Why do we have to be unwilling, right? This, again, talks about, well, it's your fault for rejection, and this takes out the idea that God did a bad job. If God exists and this is how he set it up, it's not that he does a bad job of showing himself. It's just, well, you don't want to believe it. If God showed himself to me, then I would have a fair way to say, you know what? Okay, I see that you exist and I choose or do not choose to follow you. That would be fair. But to not even show you that you exist, in this way, God gives us the opportunity to either love him or to reject him without violating our freedom. Humans don't do that, right? I still have the opportunity to love or reject somebody who presents themselves to me just because they present themselves to me and say, hey, I'm interested in dating you or something. That doesn't coerce me. That doesn't remove my freedom of choice. That just gives me knowledge that somebody is interested. And I still have free will to say yes or no. In fact, the purpose of this life is to make that choice freely and without coercion. Well, there's the coercion. For love, by definition, must be freely given. It cannot be coerced. Well, does God love us? And these are other questions that it's bringing up. It's so... And this is assuming one type of theism, right? This is making a lot of assumptions about specifically the Christian God and this, that, and the other thing with Christian God and Christian this and the Bible has to be true. What is this introduction even supposed to be? It just looks like they're constantly arguing with the Christian interpretation of the atheist or skeptic. It doesn't look like they're introducing the book. If they wanted to talk about what they're going to cover in the book and why they think it's important, do that. But this whole tangent that we're going on about, well, we have to trick you into believing because otherwise, God, if he tried to make you believe in him, then it takes away your free will because you're not allowed to choose to. I mean, it says God gives us the opportunity to either love him or to reject him. Right? That's what it says. It doesn't say God gives us the opportunity to either believe in him or to not believe in him. It says that the opportunity is to love him or reject him. God showing his presence doesn't remove that freedom. We can still reject him. In fact, we would know who we're rejecting. That's better. Isn't that better? It's not coercion. Unless you believe that God's saying, if you don't love me, then you're going to go to hell. Unless you believe that's coercion, well, then we can have a different conversation. Because that does seem like a pretty abusive relationship, right? You have to, I have to save you from yourself. You're useless and worthless without me. If you do the thing that I don't want you to do, you're going to be tortured for eternity. But if you do the thing I do want you to do, then I'm going to keep you next to me like a little pet, and I'm not going to hurt you. I mean, the only way that we would be coerced into loving God is if he was cruel, right? So they're kind of admitting here that God is cruel, that we could only love him blindly, because to know him is to be coerced into loving him. You cannot coerce somebody without having that negative, like that threat, held over their head. I don't think they realize what they're saying. That's why C.S. Lewis wrote, "The irresistible and indisputable are two weapons which the very nature of God's of God's scheme forbids him to use, irresistible and indisputable. Merely to override a human will as he felt presence in any but the faintest and most mitigated degree would certainly do, would be for him useless. He cannot ravish, he can only woo." Again, why would he be irresistible? And his presence being indisputable, again, those are not reasons that I would love or not love him. I can still choose to not love him. I don't understand why they think that this is the case. We hope the evidence we present in this book will, in some way, woo you to God. Keep in mind that it's not our evidence, it's his. We are simply compiling it in a logical order. Well, get to it. By using real-world stories and illustrations as often as possible, we intend to make this book readable and its reasoning easily accessible. Which real-world stories? Because we've heard a lot of stories so far, made a lot of claims about atheists and many skeptics and many more skeptics, but these are not accurate. In fact, by making these claims, you're kind of pointing out you don't know what the arguments are against Christianity, right? Summary and conclusion, finally. As we have seen, many religious truth claims can be investigated and their plausibility determined. Since all conclusions about such claims are based on probability rather than absolute certainty, they all, including atheistic claims, require some amount of faith. As we look at the evidence in the ensuing chapters, we'll see that the conclusions such as God exists and the Bible is true are certain beyond reasonable doubt. Therefore, it takes a lot more faith to be a non-Christian than it does to be a Christian. This is in italics. Again, we're even going against the title of the book twice. However, we've also acknowledged that the evidence alone cannot convince someone to be Christian. Some atheists and non-Christians may reject Christianity not because the evidence is inadequate, but because they don't want to accept it. Some people choose to suppress the truth rather than live by it. In fact, we humans have a fatal tendency to try and adjust the truth to fit our desires rather than adjusting our desires to fit the truth. Well, we can still reject something without suppressing the truth. We can recognize something is true, we don't want to do it anyway. It is true that if I don't exercise regularly, then my body is going to have some negative problems later on. I guess negative problems are going to be negative, right? So I'm going to have some problems down the line. That is the case, and some people still choose not to take care of their physical health. Okay, that doesn't mean they're suppressing the truth. It just means they're not following it. That's all. You don't have to suppress it. But they're using these words to make it seem like atheists and non-Christians are actively lying to themselves and doing these terrible things. They're being dishonest and all this other stuff, when in reality it would just be like rejecting any anything that you know is true, but you just, for whatever reason, aren't interested in following it at this time. So it wouldn't be about suppressing truth or something. It would just be you're not interested for whatever reason. But wait, isn't there a third alternative? What about remaining agnostic, like the Old Testament professor at the beginning of this chapter? The beginning of his introduction. He said he didn't know if God exists. Some may think that such a person is open-minded, perhaps. But there's a big difference between being open-minded and being empty-minded. Oh, sir, come on. In light of the evidence, we think agnosticism is a decision to be empty-minded. Oh, wow. So again, who is this for? Because if you're going to be insulting the people you're trying to reach, good luck not turning them off. I mean, when I said that I was going to be reading this, in some of the responses in the comments here, but also in like Twitter and in DMs and that sort of thing on Discord, people were saying I was interested in reading this book, but I didn't trust that Frank Turek would actually be honest. I mean, the best thing you could do, and we're not even out of the introduction, and there's so much distaste, like there's so much hatred, there's so much anger and lying and misrepresentation of non-Christians. And these are the people that the book is supposed to be written for. How can you hope to turn on people to Christianity by constantly insulting them page after page as being willfully awful and being empty-headed and being these dishonest types of people? I mean, I get that you're sure that you've got it, like you're sure that you chose the right thing, but you cannot be sure that you're accurately portraying every possible atheist out there, or every possible non-Christian out there. They just may not be convinced. That doesn't mean that they're bad and willfully ignorant and dishonest and all of these other horrible things and empty-minded. After all, isn't the reason we should be open-minded so that we can recognize the truth when we see it? Yes. So, what are people to do when there's not enough evidence to point us to the truth? For example, what should we do when we see evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that George Washington was the first president of the United States? Should we remain open-minded as to who the first president was? No, that would be empty-minded. Some questions are closed, and as we'll see, there's enough evidence regarding Christianity to draw reasonably certain conclusion. Then present it. Wrap up this conclusion or this introduction and present it. There's no reason to keep referring to, like they're already setting it up that, listen, we're going to provide evidence, but if it's not convincing, that's because you suck and you're being sinful and you're being bad. That's what so much of this introduction was. This idea that anybody who rejects this, they're doing it because they're just bad people who want to be sinful and they want to reject everything and they have these problems with it, not intellectually like they claim, but it's this volitional disagreement because they don't agree with the morality, because they don't want to be beholden unto anybody else and they want to just choose to live their lives however they want, ignoring the truth and suppressing the truth. I mean, that isn't how you present facts. You know, just again, from a teacher's point of view, when you're trying to make an argument in an essay, you just present the argument. You don't say, well, hypothetically, the person reading this might not believe it, because just get on with it. If you think you have the facts, present them. Let the facts speak for themselves. Let the evidence speak for itself. But instead, it's constantly wrapped up in this language of, well, we know we're right. I mean, we're pretty sure we're right, like 5% or less. We could be wrong, and that's where faith comes in. But everybody else, they have way more faith because they just don't know what they actually believe. Even agnostics, they don't even know what they believe because they're empty-minded. They're willfully giving up their knowledge and willfully giving up all. I mean, it's so bizarre, isn't it? Imagine, again, reading or even writing an essay this way, that the majority of it is not the evidence, it's arguing against your reader. That's what they're doing. They're arguing against the reader. They're arguing against their target audience and saying, well, we know we're right, and if you don't believe us, it's because you're disgusting. I mean, that is really what they're saying. As Mortimer Adler observed, our conclusion about God impacts every area of our lives. It is the key to finding unity and diversity and ultimate meaning in life. It is literally the most important question for every human being to address. Fortunately, if our reasoning is correct, we will discover the box top to life's puzzle at the end of our journey. So let's take the first step on that journey. It begins with the question of truth. And then it goes into what chapters 1 and 2 will cover. So I can't believe how long this video is. This was the remainder of the introduction, and it's so angrily written, and it's so inaccurate in its I guess deliberate misrepresentation of atheists. I don't even know. It's misrepresenting atheists, what atheists believe, and why they don't believe in Christianity. And I point again to the skeptic might then ask, why would anyone not want the free gift of forgiveness? That is a Christian's question. That is not a skeptic. These ideas that many this, but many more who, where, how do you know? It's bizarre. It's so bizarre. This whole thing should have been about the progression of the book, the 12 points, and then maybe the 5 points to kind of follow them up. And then that's it. This could have been 3 pages long and we're good to go. But instead, they had to state not just that we know that we're correct, which is a minority of this introduction. We know that we're right because we have the evidence for it. The majority of this introduction was, if you reject it, it's because there's something bad going on in your dishonest little heart. I'm disgusted by this. I mean, when did we get to, where are we at? The introduction was, all right, so the introduction starts on page 17. And I mean, this is just pages and pages of how much they hate their target audience. It's so bizarre. It's like 15 pages of how much they hate their target audience. But that's because I don't think we are their target audience. This is written for the Christian to feel really good about their beliefs, and that anybody who denies whatever's written in this book, it's because they're just dishonest and dirty little sinners with dirty little black hearts that just want to live for themselves. There's no other option. They're empty-minded. They're non-thinkers. It's so... there's so much hate. Again, it's 15 pages. For what? For what? You could have just put this in 3 pages. But you had to use the other 12 to talk about how much you hate atheists. That's so bizarre. How little you know about atheists. How you don't know anything about the actual arguments that you're claiming to argue against, but you were confident enough in your lack of knowledge that you wrote this book and made sure to insult your alleged target audience along the way. Shameful. Just shameful. Well, with that being said, I'm going to end the video. And if you check out the pinned comment, there's going to be some different ways to contact me, such as on Instagram, Twitter, or Discord. Always some great conversation going on in the Discord. There's also a link to Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can join us on Patreon and get early access to videos and a Patreon-only live stream once a month, as well as access to different pictures and thoughts and things that I post throughout the month as well. If you would like to leave a comment, I would love to hear what you have to say about this. Maybe, it's just me that felt like this was a really negative sounding introduction. Maybe you heard it in a totally different light. I would like to hear, what you have to say about that. And also about any of the logic stuff that we talked about, because I'm sure that I got some of that incorrect. But do let me know what the terms are for that, if you happen to know off the top of your head. With that being said, as always, thanks for listening.